Okay, here we go. The Gospel of Caesar.
I might put some music behind you on this.
Oh, that would be awesome.
I probably will now.
With a flag waving. God. Okay, here we go.
You're listening to Hyperlink, a podcast journey. Before we open our Bibles to the Sermon on the Mount, we need to open our eyes to the world Jesus walked in. Join Nigel and Chase as they explore the culture, politics, and pressures of first century Israel. This is The World Before the Words.
Quick note before we dive into this episode. I want to apologize for the audio quality. We've been working with some new technology, which is very exciting, but we had some unexpected hiccups on this specific episode. The content is still quite solid, but the sound's just not up to our normal standards. Thank you for your patience as we continue to learn and grow, and we appreciate you joining in on this journey with us. Enjoy the episode. So we are starting a whole new series.
Yeah.
Super excited about that. We just finished Genesis 11 as a series within our podcast, and now we're going to dive into the Sermon on the Mount. So Genesis 1 through 11, I think, might be the most important scriptures, but if they're not, I would say the Sermon on the Mount would be the only, up there. To me, they're so close to equal. So I'm so excited to dive into the Sermon on the Mount with you guys. However, Chase, before we dive in, we need to do a little bit of work to understand the world, right?
Yes.
Before we dive in. The world before the words of Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount, right? So let's dive in a little bit. There's a couple preface episodes, if you will. There's a couple of them we're going to do. This one and then the next one as well. Next episode, we'll see some of the moments leading up to the sermon within the scripture. But this episode, we're really going to focus more on the physical world of Jesus' day and what was really going on.
Yeah, the backdrop.
The backdrop. Yeah. So let's start with Hellenism and Herod. All right. So Hellenism and Herod, right? Do you know what Hellenism is? Do you have a definition for it?
I don't have one. I know we have gone over this before, but I don't have one that I could regurgitate that's my translation of Hellenism. I think I would butcher it more than I would help.
No, I don't have a clear definition in my head either. But I can kind of tell you the elements of Hellenism is really how I think about Hellenism. So Rome had taken over. So that's what had happened. Rome had taken over the world, and they did it with a lot of times they did it with minimal casualties. So that's part of how. And what they did is they took the Alexander the Great model. So Alexander the Great helped make Greece the strongest empire at their time. And what did he do? He came to Greece, or they came to him and say, "Will you do this?" He essentially said, "If you give me 4 things," which is what we call Hellenism. "If you give me these 4 things, I can take over the world." And they're like, cool, what are those 4 things? The first thing is education. If you give me education. Second thing he said is if you give me entertainment to give to the people. He didn't want education for himself. He wanted the education for the people. He wanted entertainment for the people. Third thing he wanted is healthcare for the people. And the fourth thing he wanted is competition, if you will, for the people. So what did we get? We got education, and that's really a good thing. They started building universities and higher learning, and Greek philosophy really started becoming a thing that other cultures were able to grow and learn from. So education is not bad, right, Chase? No. It's not bad, but you can control what people learn if it's done by the government. Higher learning, right? You can control. So then it becomes a way of control and indoctrination, right? Greece is good. Rome is good. Rome is great. This is Rome's history. We're great. And maybe it wasn't, Yeah. Then you had entertainment. So why entertainment? Because entertainment also can be a really good thing. The thing is, all 4 of these can be really good. But why entertainment? It's to keep people pacified and focused on something that's not really important, right?
It's the lullaby.
So they're lulling people to sleep to entertain them, right? So that's where the theater and thespians come from, right? The theater. What happened?
That's an old movie reference.
So that's where the theater comes in, right? And then, and again, they're using it, and we know even today there can be, you can push agendas through storytelling. You can, so they can push their own agendas through some of the storytelling, right? That's just part of what people do. People write from the lens of what they believe. That's just natural. It's not even always pushing agendas. People just write from the lens of what they believe. Like J.R. Tolkien, he was a Catholic. He believed in the Bible. He believed in God and Jesus. And he wrote Lord of the Rings, and they're like, it's an allegory. He said, no, it's not an allegory. Yeah. And it's really not a one-for-one allegory, but it's just because there's so much of the Bible that he believes that it comes out in his writings.
Yeah,
and he's not trying to actively say, well, this is my Jesus character, and this is my Satan character.
Yeah.
Where that's kind of more like what Narnia was. Narnia was more like, this is my Jesus character.
And that's C.S. Lewis.
And he was purposely taking that word. I feel like Tolkien was just writing out of who he was.
Yes.
And he was very much a Catholic Christian, right?
And insanely gifted.
Oh, so gifted, dude. And studied and schooled and like just all of the things.
Yeah.
And then you had healthcare, right? So healthcare, again, a good thing. But when you what that does is it keeps people dependent on the system that is keeping them under the thumb, right? So the same system that's overtaxing you is also keeping you healthy. The same system that's sending your young men off to war for their wars and their own initiatives is also keeping your mom and dad healthy. So it's hard to balance. It's part of it. And then you have competition, right? And competition. So that was where the Olympic Games started happening, and the competition is really if they are competing with themselves, because the Olympic Games were about God versus God, like these polytheistic societies. So the God of this city versus the God of this city, and you would send your best champion, they would send theirs, and they'd run the race, or they throw the javelins, they'd do their things, and whichever God was more powerful is the person who would prevail, right? So we're really pitting religion versus religion, God versus God, city versus city, and state versus state. That's really what was going on with these Olympic Games. That carried through as well. There was a lot of competition and stuff through the Roman Empire. And this is what we call Hellenism, right? So this Hellenism. And these tactics, of course, they're so antiquated and archaic, they would never work today, right, Chase?
Never.
Americans are too smart. Christians for sure.
They said sarcastically.
Christians for sure are too smart for that. I used to wonder this. So why does the NBA champion, the winner of the Super Bowl, why do they get invited to the White House? Why does that matter? It's because it's the same thing where we live in a very, like, if you think about any platform, they're going to talk about healthcare. Any candidate running for any kind of major office, healthcare is a part of it because that's part of what the government is helping us offer. They're utilizing the same tactics, again, because it reduces casualties, it reduces war, it keeps the people at bay. And maybe sometimes they're doing it for good reasons. And I'm not saying everybody has nefarious reasons. I'm just letting you know that is Hellenism at work in our society as well. Again, the good things, but the thing with a good thing is it can be corrupted in our world, correct?
Yep. Anything.
Anything can be corrupted, except for one thing, right? What's that? God. Yeah. And his word. His word, I don't believe can be actually corrupted. Like, you can change it, and then it's not his word, so that's not corrupted.
It stands as a testament and a bedrock, regardless of how you view that. It is always the same. But where we are in our lives and how we view it, just like anything else, I could go down a rabbit hole there. But like your perspective will always be how you interpret what it is that you take in. So how you view that goes for God, that goes for government, that goes for people, especially. So everything is always a reflection of where we are at, not necessarily where that thing is, because God's truth stands firm.
Yes,
no matter what.
That's true. A good example is a parent who babies a 14-year-old, 15, 16-year-old. They still see them as younger or unable, and therefore they're babying them more. When the truth of the matter is, they have the capability, right? So that's just you hopefully, listeners, it's not you, but hopefully you've known that. Maybe it's been you were that child, but that is a thing where you can see somebody as incapable when they are actually more capable than because you're viewing them incorrectly. So that's, to me, a really good example.
I have an 8-year-old, and those who know me know that, but I've been guilty of that. So I've recently changed that, and it's like shaking her world. But it's like so good because like it's helping her know that she's not only capable, but that she's also worth loving.
Yeah.
And
so good. Yeah. So good. Yeah. Because she's capable, she's strong, is building characters. So many things happen there. Yeah. So yeah. But you know what? So what happens is you have this incorruptible thing, the word of God. And this incorruptible thing, the word of God, and we call the Matthew is a gospel, right? And it's the kingdom is here. Jesus keeps saying, John the Baptist said, repent, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. It's here. Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is here. Matthew's gospel is in some ways all about bringing the kingdom of heaven here. So, but let's get back to first century Israel, right? The 4 things that kept them in line: less likely to rebel. And how did Rome ensure Hellenism stayed in Israel? Because Rome and Israel are really far apart. So how do they ensure Hellenism kept its grasp on Israel, Jerusalem, Judea, Galilean region? How did they ensure that?
How do they keep them in line?
Yeah, how do they keep people in line?
Well, I want to say taskmasters, but they're not that. I think of Egypt.
Yeah.
Like rulers.
The rulers, they called them governors at the time. The governors, right? You're going to put those governors involved, like Pilate. You're going to put those governors to oversee this area. And they were really mainly ensuring Hellenism was continuing and that people weren't rebelling. And then the second thing they were really about is collecting taxes to make sure that Rome could fund the wars and fund their people and fund their empire, right?
Part of the reason why they took them over. I mean,
yeah.
You need money to
so that's what they would do. They would place these people. Now, Pilate's in the Jesus story is one of them. But what you're going to have is Herod the Great he bought his way to be over all of Israel, right? Mm-hmm. So he was one of the we're going to talk about him now because he was one of the wealthiest guys to ever live. Like he actually bought his way into that because he had so much money. He would just like, I'll give you this money if you let me be in charge of Israel. And they were like, yes, let's go. How do we know? Because tax records are the best kept records of antiquity. Yeah. So once they start realizing taxes and money, that's when we know for sure because that's the best kept stuff. So his tax records show that his income was 100 times the gross GDP of his kingdom. His personal income was 100 times more than all of his kingdom, what his kingdom could bring in. His gross income.
I don't know where he got that. That doesn't math for me, but I trust it. But that's a lot of money.
So you throw in the Elon Musks and the Bill Gates and those people, those Warren Buffetts, right? Mm-hmm. These extreme billionaires that have hundreds of billions of dollars. Their gross GDP is not 100 times most countries, some countries, but not 100 times most of America. Yet we now maybe it is because we can talk about that. So we're not gonna get into American taxes and stuff.
Yeah. No. We're talking about this time.
But yeah. So so he's an Edomite, which is fun. But if you want to know a little bit more about him, and he actually got his so they were really wealthy, and they were the ones who have the Petra.
Mm-hmm. Oh yes.
Yeah. So they were impenetrable as well. So it was really hard to get, and they had on the mines and stuff. They had so much salt, and salt was extremely wealthy.
Petra, for those who don't know, was a city carved into. Or carved out of, I should say, a mountain or a rock.
Yeah.
So like the city, the mountain was the city, but it was all carved out, kind of like dwarves.
Yeah. Super cool stuff.
J.R.
Tolkien. Again, it's weird. It's like everything in life beautiful. Connects back to the Bible somehow. Yeah, you just understand it's so weird. Someone should start a podcast about that.
And technically, the Romans were a lot shorter then too. So
yeah. So anyway, Herod the Great. So everything he did was bigger. He was wealthy, but he was also paranoid, and so everything he did was bigger and better and shinier. So the stone, when they were rebuilding the temple, he was like, they're doing this temple project, massive temple project. They were bringing in new stones, and they know where they quarried them from, a couple miles away. And these stones, some of them are tons. They're multiple tons. They weigh so much. They don't know how they moved them. They don't know how these people in first century Israel moved these stones to place them on the Temple Mount. They don't know, but he was making sure he was going to outdo Solomon. He was going to outdo Solomon's temple because he was in his mind, a better Solomon, more wealthy, wiser, all of the thing, right? So he's going to outdo Solomon. And so there was a massive Temple Mount reconstruction, if you will, that they were doing. And they don't know how they did it to this day, because what they did is they took the architects that figured it out and they killed them and destroyed the plans.
As you do.
Why? So no one knows. So there's a wonder of the world.
Yeah.
He wanted to have a wonder of the world. And
nobody could replicate it if it's destroyed. Right.
And then he had another one. He wanted a palace at a specific place on a mountain. And there wasn't a mountain there. So what did he do, Chase?
He built a mountain.
He built a literal mountain that still stands today.
Yeah.
Mount Herod still stands today. And he put the Herodium, his favorite palace, on this mountain.
It's more like a giant hill, but same thing, right?
Yeah. In that time, in their region, it's a mountain. You can see
everything around it.
And he says he built it specifically, right? And it's called Mount Herod. And you can see it from Israel. Like, you can see it from Jerusalem. I mean, you can see Mount Herod, like, on clear days. At least you could see it. It was there. And he had this crazy escape plan from where he stayed. He had all these places. And this was one of the palaces that was an escape plan. It ended up becoming his tomb as well. That's where they ended up burying him. It was his favorite place. But he was so paranoid. It was wild, which makes sense when you read the biblical narrative in Matthew. And he's like, "Hey, let's kill all the babies because there's some king of Israel. He's super paranoid." Mm-hmm. So you start to get that even in the biblical text how paranoid he is and how much power he has.
Took a page out of Egypt's history.
It's so fascinating. It's like Matthew does this paralleling of Jesus and Moses in so many areas, and we're going to talk about that as we continue going through the Sermon on the Mount. You're going to see some more of that unravel, if you will. But we're going to, so we're going to dive a little deeper into the symbolism of the mountains as well. Like, mountains really symbolize something, but one thing we can say is that Herod, I told you, he kind of wanted to outdo Solomon. He wanted to be a god. He wanted to be considered a god, if you will. And when you build your own mountain, having a mountain is where you went to go meet with God. And that was ancient time, especially in the Semitic cultures, those Eastern cultures. Mountains represented, like, different gods had different mountains. So here's Herod's mountain. So he also kind of wanted to do that. Like, he was doing a lot of stuff there. But in a lot of Hellenism in Rome, right, a lot of Herod the Great, what was the response of the Jewish people? Like, what was their response? And so we're going to, much like today, there were several responses to any kind of political power, to any kind of change in the world. There was several responses, right? There's always going to be several types of responses. So Israel, there was basically 5 different types of responses to Hellenism in first century Judaism. Okay? We're going to talk about those. The first one I want to talk about is the Sadducees. And to use the old preacher joke, they were so sad. You see? So sad.
I grew up hearing that all the time with my dad.
It's so funny to me. I know, it's terrible.
It helps.
The word I like to put in Sadducees, because we don't know what that means. Like, in our modern American vernacular, the word I think best suits them is they're the mafia. I'm gonna make you an offer you cannot refuse, right? So they were the mafia. They wanted to make money. They wanted to keep their power. They were priests of the Levite line. They were priests. They were always a high priest, and they ran Jerusalem with 7 families. These 7 families would alternate who was the high priest or whatnot, but they ran Jerusalem with these 7 families. They were the mafia, if you will. To put it in perspective, Jesus spends 3 years, roughly, most of 3 years of his ministry with the Pharisees and their worldview, and where they had a lot more power. He spends about a week in Jerusalem, and he gets killed. Okay,
makes sense why he wasn't there a lot.
He did go to Jerusalem. I think John has him there early in his ministry. At the end, I do think he goes there twice. Most books just have it once. It's a personal thing. I think he went there probably every year for Passover anyway.
Yeah. So or either Passover or the Feast of Sukkot, Tabernacles, which is actually when you were required to go back to your home. So, well, that's, I guess, that. Anyway.
Nazareth. Yeah. So, no problem. Yeah, so then that's the first one, Sadducees. So they're like the mafia. So when you think Sadducees, you read Sadducees, kind of think mafia mindset, right? And then you have the Herodians, right? So the Herodians, I would call the partakers. So they're the ones who, they stayed Jewish, they kept their religion, but they enjoyed the comforts of Rome, right? They enjoyed the theater. They enjoyed the Olympic Games. They were able to enjoy the Roman art and music and festivals. And they said we can hold to our Jewish faith and still enjoy this. So there was complete cities that really had this more Herodian mindset. Obviously, not everybody in any city has any mindset, but there was complete cities that were predominantly Herodian, or that lived a little bit more Herodian within Israel, right? And so there's times where Jesus is in and out of some of those cities. And then you have the next group I want to talk about, the Essenes, which is some of my favorite kind of groups in one sense, because they're what I call the monks. They wanted to live apart. So the response to Rome was essentially, we're out of here. You guys are corrupt. And they were actually Levites. They were priests, and they didn't like the Sadducees, the system the Sadducees set up to make power and keep money and make money and keep power, to do all those things. So they defected from the priesthood, and they went out into Qumran, is where most of them went. They went out to the desert, and they they brought some of the scrolls with them, and they started just rewriting the text in Greek and the Septuagint, where we get the Septuagint from, but in Greek and in Hebrew, they were just writing it. And they were the ones, if you've heard the stories, they would get to the name Yahweh, and they would ritualistically cleanse themselves before they write it. Then they would write it, and then they would ritualistically cleanse themselves afterwards. They had such weight for the name of God. So these guys, their response to Rome was they were gone. They were the ones who let's buy 50 acres and get off the map. They were off the grid, right?
I want to be in that scene.
And then there's zealots, right? So zealots were their response. They're the rebellion. They're the rebels. You rebel scum. That's the zealots. Their response to Rome was fight against it, like with espionage tactics. Like we're gonna fight with power, with the same tools of empire. We're gonna fight, and so that's the zealots, and they wanted to fight against Rome to get Rome's grasp off of Israel because Rome was corrupting Israel, and they wanted to fight it. And there all these things are based in their Jewish faith. They're not like they're leaving their Jewish faith to do it. They believe that this is part of their Jewish faith. And so then you have the Pharisees, and the Pharisees are what I would call the devoted. And yet they wanted to live the law so perfectly, and they wanted to force others to because they believed if they can get back to the law, God would deliver them from Rome. So they didn't want Rome there, but they wanted to be delivered from Rome, and they believed they had to keep the law perfect to get delivered from Rome. And so what they did is they took the 613 laws of Moses and they built over 2,000 around it, kind of like a fence around the 613. Why? So they made everybody keep the 2,000 around there so people wouldn't even get close to the 613. Mm-hmm. Like the heart of it, rationally it makes sense and the heart is right.
Yeah.
But the method and the forcing is not right?
That's adding to the law. I mean, it's adding to the word.
Yeah, exactly. And what I really want to let you know is that this isn't just a response to Rome, but this is actually the worldview. This is the lens and how they view the world. And you were talking about that. This is their ideology. You were talking about that earlier. Like the way you view the world determines how you respond to even the scriptures. And the way they view this is a worldview. This is how they framed their world. And so these are about the 5 major worldviews of the Jewish people of the day, that time that Jesus was born into, and their response to what Rome was doing. Do you have any comments?
I mean, there's not really any change from then to now. Like we all do the same thing. We have our own groups. I can see like different groups in society that match up with each of those.
Yeah.
So it's just like there's nothing new under the sun.
They are the same. We have a lot of the same ideologies in America today. Mm-hmm. And I would venture to say within Christianity today, right?
Yeah.
And I would say the vast majority of Christians that I've encountered in my years of being a Christian, including myself, I've leaned into several of these, is Pharisaical. There's a lot of Pharisaical Christians and sometimes they don't implement it on others, but they're being very Pharisaical around themselves only.
Yeah.
But sometimes they are pushing on others. There's a lot of Pharisaical, and then there's also a lot of Herodians. We're going to partake of all of the fun in the culture, and it's okay. And maybe a response to the Pharisaical worldview that was really strong at one point in America. The Puritans are like that's kind of how we came over, right? A lot of that. So there's a lot of that there. There's also Essenes. I mean, especially modern, especially more recently, there's more of that kind of like, let's just retract and build our own communities and get out. Mm-hmm. There's also some of that going on for sure. Yep. And what's funny is Jesus would bring and teach the things of the kingdom worldview, and it will challenge each of these worldviews. Mm-hmm. In a way, and we're going to talk about that once we start getting into the sermon. It's going to be so good.
One of my passions is the kingdom of heaven and how like simple it really is. I know we're going to get into it, but just like I love what I have personally been studying more and more and like meditating on, which is like what the kingdom of heaven is. What does it mean to be now, and how to like. How viewing scripture from that perspective, if you hop into a kingdom mindset and viewing scripture, will drastically change the way you look at the Bible even. So it's good.
Yes, I agree.
I look forward to that.
It's going to be so fun. And then it's going to be so fun, Chase. And when you start talking about the kingdom and you're talking about it in light of worldviews, what we don't think about is that kingdoms typically have a worldview. So there's an American mindset there that's different than a British mindset. Yeah. That's different than a Canadian mind. That's different than a Brazilian mind. That's different than South African mind. There's a cultural mindset, if you will, within the kingdoms of the world that is just different. Yeah. And I'm not saying one's right and wrong and one's perfect and one's all terrible. I'm just saying that there are differences in how we view the world, what we find, how we weight importance. Like we all know like certain things are important, but there's differences. I would venture to say America kind of in my lifetime has put working as more important than even the family. Mm-hmm. When you have cultures in South America that the family is most important and work is second. And I would venture to say that Jesus and the Bible would say family is more important. God, family, and country. But there is still importance in working, right? It's not important, but it's where we're lining them up and how important they are, the weight of them.
Yeah. I can give a really example around the house about this. I realized this last night. Like, I used to be so tied up. Life has drastically changed over the last couple of years, but like my home life, if we want to look at it from this perspective, is like I used to be so tied up in like whether things were clean or not. And my peace would be ruined. Like, I would not be able to sit and rest unless everything was put away, wiped down. And so that's not a very organic way of living. I'm putting the house above my family in this sense. But if I actually look at it now, which is how I live now, which I didn't realize, but it's like so much more peaceful, is like I look at my family as first, and that like when we are living in the home, messes happen and things get out, you use them, things get dirty like the kitchen. But like that's actually good, and I've learned to enjoy the mess. I've learned to enjoy like the little remnants of like kids playing stuff around the house or whatever. Because hair on a dog, right? And I have a dog now that's like leaves hair everywhere. But what that does is it reminds me, and it points me to like that mess, points me to the life that is happening in the house. And I trust and I know that because we're a good, responsible family, that we enjoy it. And then at the end of the day, or when the thing is done, it's tidied up and we all do that together, or whoever's like made that mess, or we help each other out. So like instead of like living out of this angst to make everything perfect all the time, good. I now live in this space and I look at it as a joyous reminder of what I have that I'm so grateful for.
It's so good.
Like changing your perspective.
Yeah, and that's what Jesus is doing with us, is he's helping us change our perspective throughout all of the Sermon on the Mount. That is really what the pinnacle of it is, or that's what the point of it is. So what Matthew is doing throughout all of the book of Matthew is he's presenting a gospel, right? He's presenting a kingdom and a new king. And so let's talk about this word gospel.
Yeah, what's with that word?
What is with that word, Nigel? Man, what does gospel mean? Like, we probably all have different things we think of.
Yeah, it sounds preachy.
It sounds preachy. It does. It's one of those things you hear. I mean, imagine, sometimes I put myself in the place of someone who doesn't know a lot about the Bible, going to church and you hear this word gospel. What does that mean?
Yeah.
What does gospel mean?
You just think of like a bunch of people hooting and hollering and singing and then don't know when to stop the clock.
Yeah. What does that mean? So, yeah, or is it gospel? Like, there's gospel music? What does that mean? And then there's like, I only preach the gospel, right? The gospel of Jesus Christ is the power of God for salvation. And what does that mean? I mean, I know the Bible says it. I believe it. It's true. What does that mean?
Is it a Hebrew Jewish culture word? Is gospel a Jewish culture word?
That's the thing. It's not. It's a Greek word.
Throw it out.
It's a Greek word. Throw it out. It's a Greek word that these writers are subverting and using to subvert the culture in order to show what Christ is doing to the culture, what Christ wants to do, and what his followers should be doing to the culture. And the gospel is the word gospel really means good news. We know the direct translation means good news. It's used as a way to bring the good news of a new king and a new kingdom. So whenever a new emperor would take the throne, when one Caesar would pass away and the new one would come up, he would have a gospel and he would send people out to go share his gospel, what he was going to do. Much like I'm an American, but every president, every political leader, they have what they're running on. These are the tenets of the next 4 years of what we're going to do in this world, right? Yeah. And it's like that's their gospel. That's what they believe is the good news to help make whatever country they're in better.
Yeah,
or to progress them.
Yeah, you could use to get rid of that lullaby effect that we talk about. You could say like this is the proclamation of the goodness that is to come with this kingdom. You know? Yes, it's just like this declaration of goodness, where it's actually kind of like the sales pitch for that kingdom.
And it's 100%.
Here's why this is a good thing and why you should not freak out. Because that's also a part of that culture, what they were trying to do when you were talking about earlier, where they try to do it peacefully, like take over a land peacefully. The first thing you're going to do when you show up is like, hey, this is why this is a good thing. This is why, and what that does is they're trying to bring peace and they're trying to bring obedience whenever they bring a gospel. And so like when the kingdom of heaven, it's like, hey, okay, Jesus, you're showing up talking about the kingdom of heaven. What what you got. Like, what are the benefits?
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah.
And that's basically what the disciples, apostles are writing. They're saying, this is why it's good to be with the king.
Yeah.
You know?
Thank you, Chase. That was so good. So the term gospel is actually connected to a god, a little g god, Zeus, right? He was the giver of good news. And Hermes is the one who was the bringer of good news.
I think it's Hermes.
Oh, sure. I don't speak things with Hermes. Is it Zeus? Zeus and Hermes. This is something that had been going on for a long time before Jesus.
Yes.
Jesus is not the beginner of the word gospel.
Right. This is happening, and all of this, contextually, the whole purpose of this even podcast, like this episode, is to show how, like, the reason, like, when Jesus entered the scene, he was literally using their props and language and structure to get them to the kingdom. So it's like stepping stones. And
his disciples kept going.
Right.
Yes. And so Alexander the Great would have a gospel. Caesar would have a gospel. Augustus would have Caesar Augustus had his own gospel. In fact, we still have some of Caesar Augustus's. Is that how you say that? Caesar Augusti? I'm joking. Sorry. Caesar Augustus.
I see what you did.
Caesar Augustus's gospels, and they predate Jesus's about 5 to 6 decades. So Chase, I want you to read this. You can definitely pick up the iPad, read this in your best, voice that you want to utilize, because Chase is the master of these kind of things.
Citizens of Priene, since divine providence has brought to life the most perfect, good and Augustus, whom she filled with virtues the benefits for all mankind, bestowing on us, Augustus Caesar has Savior of the world, for he has put an end to war and brought perfect peace. By the Epiphany, advent of his birth, he brought the gospel of peace to all mankind. For that reason, the Greeks of Asia have on this day declared that the new year from then on shall be on the 23rd day of September, the day of the birth of this God. Never will another gospel surpass the gospel of this birth. He is not only Lord of the empire, but Lord of the earth and of the calendar and time itself.
Wow.
That's quite the proclamation, actually. Like, what?
The birth of this God.
Like the kahunas on this guy,
He redeemed the word. Like, yeah, you can. Like, what, like, when you read that, like, you hear so many things and phrases that the New Testament writers hijack.
Yeah.
To say, you thought it was going to be Caesar Augustus, then he died. You thought it was going to be, and then we got a guy who died, but he rose again, and he is actually the Lord of all, and not just of the earth, and not just of time itself, but of hell and the grave.
Yeah. Over death. Which is actually the one thing that all these other guys, couldn't do.
Yeah. Even if they were a god, little g god, they couldn't overcome death.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus is redeeming this word gospel.
Yeah.
The New Testament writers hijacked this on purpose.
Yeah. I love that concept because, like, I know that I get wrapped up in how we just, for time's sake, like, we just passed what we some call Easter Sunday, Resurrection Sunday, which was actually the end of Passover. The timing was beautiful this year on all of that. But to say that oftentimes throughout history, the Greeks, I think as a culture and a human society around the world, have taken the Greco-Roman templates and, like, Christianized them. Like, we've just tried to reference our things to be from their template. But we can go the calendar, we can go, like, how we keep time, all of that. But even in tradition, I think here the point I'm trying to make is that, like, Jesus, like, he's not worried about showing up and saying, hey, here's what you know, and I'm going to relate it, and I'm going to translate the kingdom of heaven into words that make sense to you.
Yes.
And he's not afraid to use their template and build from it.
Yeah, hyperlink. If you've been following with us from the beginning, at least from the first 11, you notice how the creation narrative, the flood narrative,
right,
they have very close templates to Mesopotamian creation narratives and the Epic of Gilgamesh at points, right?
Yeah.
It's on purpose.
Yeah.
Because he's taking what they know and saying, like, this is not completely accurate. I'm going to make it accurate, but while making it accurate, I'm going to reveal who I am and who you are and how the world can be if you live with me, submit to me, and you let me be your God and you become my people. This is what we can accomplish together. And this is what the gospel is. And so the gospel, we have this idea. I grew up in the church where the gospel was this idea of preaching to the lost, where the gospel is just getting people saved from hell.
Right.
That's the gospel. And that is the beginning, the first step of the gospel.
Yeah.
It is not the gospel holistically.
Right.
The whole gospel is you get saved from hell to heaven, and you start to bring heaven on earth, and you start to infiltrate the kingdom of darkness that has been overwhelming your life, and you bring his marvelous light, as the Bible calls it, and you start to shine, and you become, and what, right after the Beatitudes in the sermon, we're not there, but right after the Beatitudes, he says, you are the light of the world. Like, there's a reason, because he's portraying that the gospel is more than fire insurance. The gospel is a way to live now.
I think so many times we get so stuck on, I've actually said this because I've actually been a part of like different church bodies at a Sunday gathering where the whole purpose is telling you what you're saved from instead of what you are saved into. And when you get stuck at the cross, it's like Jesus is not there anymore and he's not at the tomb. You can't find him in either one of those places anymore. So why we should get stuck there is like, that's like the preface to the beginning of the entrance of the kingdom of heaven. I thoroughly believe like we're all living in hell or heaven on earth now. And this is the story of how you can enter the kingdom of heaven now into your everyday life. It's not something you wait for, you know?
Yes.
So it's not fire insurance. It's like, hey, how does this change my life?
It's not
today?
Just.
Right.
It's both and. And that's like you said, that like what you're saved from, not what you're saved to. It's both and. Like you are saved from something. Right. And you are saved to something.
Well, it's a shakeup. It's like saying, hey, this is how good as it gets. And then people can go, oh, wow, my life doesn't look like that. Wow, what can I change? I do want that. So instead of getting your focus so much on where you are, you look at it in relation to your perspective and your relationship to the kingdom of heaven. And you go, oh, I want to move towards that. It's the call. It's the drawing. Instead of pushing people towards something, you entice them with the gospel in a good way that says, hey, here's goodness, and this is the direction. Do you want to respond to the invitation?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The gospel is this: is the new king, the new kingdom has brought the salvation of the world, brought the salvation of God to defeat chaos, to defeat death, to defeat all other lesser gods that you're Caesars and other gods that you serve. He's defeated them all. And then this is why Paul says, I am unashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. It is the power of God to salvation to the Jew first and then to the Gentile. What he's saying, it's the power of God to bring his gospel, his kingdom, the salvation of his kingdom to everyone. Because that's what Rome was saying. We are saving the world through Rome. We're saving these primitives through Rome. We're going to bring education. We're going to bring health. And Jesus brings education. And Jesus brings health, right? Yeah. Like, that's what he brings. And honestly, like, there's some entertainment with God, right? I get, you hang out with God long enough, you start getting entertained. Not because he's an entertainer, but because there's an aspect of entertainment that we have as humans, and that is partly divine, right? Just being able to entertain and to enjoy something, and to create something that is enjoyable. Is it not entertaining to swim and to go to an ocean and God made that? That's entertainment.
I actually think worship is interacting with God through a way that entertains us, because God is always meeting us. So your creative expression or just enjoying something. Like we had a meal the other day and we were just so excited about that thing. I think it all's connected. I'm not saying it's like the same thing.
Well, I would push back a little bit because I always think worship is about God first. So it's not about what we enjoy. Sometimes you can worship God through something you don't enjoy. Seeing is the first word.
Yes.
First time worship is used in Genesis 22, where Abraham's going to go and sacrifice Isaac. So it's not something Abraham enjoyed. However, I think that we miss the idea that in whatever we do, as Paul said, we can glorify God in all you do. In all, what was that? Everything. So if I'm eating a meal, it can roll up into worship. I've talked about this on this podcast before. Yeah. It can roll up to worship. You talk and so I do agree with that. That is how we are to live. The new kingdom's here, right? Jesus is Lord is the most politically charged statement maybe of all time. Like, Jesus is Lord over, like they said, Caesar Augustus was Lord over all, even time.
So funny.
It's outrageous when you think about it, but people literally believe that. And not just Caesar, but other people believe that. This is why the disciples, why the apostles, the early church was getting martyred. This is why they were getting martyred, because they refused to say Caesar's Lord anymore. Because Jesus rose from dead. He actually is. Jesus brought salvation for the world, not Caesar. So when Matthew was writing a gospel, he's challenging the worldview of the powers of the day and the subjects of the powers of the day, the laymen. The gospel is meant to challenge, to influence, and change how we think, our ideologies, our comfort, you might say. Romans says, do not be conformed, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Changing how you think about things is how you get transformed. And that's precisely what gospels are supposed to do. What am I to think about this new king? And what am I to think about this new kingdom? And how am I to live in this new kingdom? If it's a new kingdom, what is good, what isn't? What does it mean? How is this going to benefit me? How am I going to benefit them? All these things are changing because it's not the way, the system of the world. So now that we understand the world a little bit better that Jesus was born into, the role of the gospel, let's talk a little bit, dive a little deeper, a little more journey into Matthew's gospel. He's a Jewish author writing to a Jewish audience. Not all the Gospels are written to the Jewish audience. Right. Matthew's is specifically written to a Jewish audience. It's very important. I believe he actually wrote it in Hebrew. Now, a lot of scholars don't. That's okay. We haven't found a Hebrew text. However, a lot of the early church fathers, I always say these names wrong, but Irenaeus, these are 2nd century church fathers. They believed that there was a Hebrew text of Matthew as well. So I lean into that, but no big deal if you don't. But I do believe he wrote it in Hebrew and it was translated to Greek, and we have the Greek manuscripts as the oldest manuscripts that we have are Greek. We don't have any old Hebrew manuscripts, no big deal. But each gospel has a theme. It has, dare I say the word, agenda? Ooh.
An agenda.
Oh, I use that word on purpose. Each gospel has an agenda.
Yeah.
I think about it like this. Like when I go to church, most pastors in modern day America have series they're going in and out of. And a series is a pastor saying, I want my church, or I believe God is telling me to tell my church about this specific topic for a certain amount of time. And that is the agenda I believe God has given me to give my church. It's not random, it's on purpose. And the agenda is what they believe God is saying. And I believe Matthew has an agenda, Mark has an agenda, John, Luke, they have agendas, they have a theme. This is their series, this is their opus, if you will, what they are going to be known by and for the rest of time. So let's find out what Matthew's agenda is. Let's go ahead and read Matthew 1, verse 1.
The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham.
Wow. So this is the genealogy. We've done a genealogy episode already. What is the big question we like to ask with genealogies?
I mean, this is about where someone came from. Like
where?
The lineage.
The lineage.
Often like with the land they came from too.
So the way I like to phrase the question, you're getting there. The way I like to phrase it is, whose seed are we reading about?
Oh, yes.
Is it the seed of the woman?
Right.
Or is it the seed of the serpent?
Yep.
Because that's going to determine how we look at this genealogy. Whose seed are we looking at? And then what does it say in verse 2?
Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. Verse 3, and Judah the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar, and Perez the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Ram, the father of Abinadab. It keeps going and going.
Okay, cool. So what you have is it starts with Abram, who is the pinnacle, the father of faith.
Yes.
So they're showing pedigree immediately, right? Jewish genealogies and Eastern genealogies were about pedigree. Even the Caesars, the Roman genealogies were about pedigree. Yeah. So what you get is you get Abraham, you get Judah, you get David, you get these ideas coming out immediately from Matthew's genealogy. Like this is a pedigree of Jesus.
These are the patents of nobility.
Yes. You want to know why? We're going to start from the beginning, why he is the one you should follow, the King of Kings. There we go. Abram, your dude, the dude of faith, the father of faith, the father of all that we have as Israelis. I mean, he's from that line. David, he's from the line of what are we talking about? This is so good, right? So those are the two OGs, right? And then in verse 3, you read it. What stands out in verse 3?
A woman is mentioned.
Ooh.
Tamar,
a woman. That's an interesting woman to mention too, right? The story of Tamar is wild. Go read it. It's in Genesis.
Synopsis. Do we want a synopsis?
You can.
Essentially, Tamar is it Judah's daughter-in-law, technically?
Yeah.
She, I think, runs through several of his sons. They keep dying. That was very common for a Jewish man to take on a brother's widowed spouse. So that was very honorable.
Yes.
Well, she didn't have any children because this kept happening. And she essentially she deceives Judah, lies with him in order to maintain the lineage, the line. And Judah had, not good motives, it seemed, but then can you define how that ended? I like the way you...
She dresses up as a prostitute, essentially prostitutes herself out to Judah. And he leaves like a scepter with her and some things of his with her. And then she comes up to him and says what happened.
As Tamar.
She comes up to him later on, months later, as Tamar. That's what's happened, and doesn't use his name, of course, but says, hey, this guy did this, and blah, 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 and what should happen to him? And Judah's like, well, he should be killed, and blah, 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 according to the law. And then she says, well, these are his things, and she's presenting Judah with his stuff. So then Judah realizes, and what the Bible says is Judah says, protect her at all costs, essentially. She is more righteous than I. Yeah. He calls her righteous. Yeah. Because he refused to give her the last son. And when they weren't married, they would go out and they would be unprotected, essentially, in that time frame. So her ability to point out his flaws somehow and his heart and the impurities in his heart, when he saw the reflection of his heart, he called her righteous, which I find that beautiful.
Which was a big deal for a man to do at that time, because women were more treated like assets.
Yes.
Like livestock. It was a signal of their wealth.
Yes.
So if a woman was widowed, they were considered to be outcasts.
Yes. And so here we have a story of this crazy story that is he's writing to Jewish audiences who would know this story very well, and say Tamar, and they're going to come in. This whole story is going to pop in their mind. Why are we talking? I thought the genealogy was supposed to be about pedigree. Why are we bringing up Tamar? You don't bring up Tamar. You don't have to. Like, Judah's fine. You don't have to bring up Tamar.
Yeah.
We'll read verse 5.
And Salmon, the father of Boaz, by Rahab, and Boaz, the father of Obed, by Ruth, and Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of David the king.
So we got to David, but we got to David through Rahab and Ruth. Wait a second. More women are mentioned, and you don't have to. And Rahab was what? She was a
prostitute.
And she wasn't Jewish.
What was that city?
Canaanite.
Yeah, she was a Canaanite.
She was a Canaanite.
In Jericho.
There wasn't really like Israel a nation at the time, but if you look at the lineage, even Tamar she's not quite from that line either, right?
Yeah, right.
So you gotta look at this. Like, these are all outside of Israelis coming in. Women, prostitutes outside of Israel coming in and are in the lineage and shouted out. This is a shout out in the genealogy. Yeah. Shout out to Rahab. Shout out to Tamar. This is a shout out.
I love that.
In the genealogy. A prostitute, not good pedigree. But what does she do? The 12 spies go into Canaan and they're running, and the Canaanites realize they're there, and they're hiding in the wall, which is also like the outside city. It was like apartments, essentially, and that's where the lowest class would live. So they get into Rahab hides them in her home, in her apartment, and so they can escape. So she is now, and then she decides to live with them and to change her life. And she gets a husband, an Israeli husband, and then she has some kids, and next thing you know, like, out of her line is King David.
Yeah.
What?
Is David's great or grandmother or great grandmother?
Yeah. So this is crazy. So like, again, what is going on? And then we have Ruth, and I love the story of Ruth, because Ruth's story, the whole book of Ruth with Boaz and Ruth, they're two of the most righteous people we see in the Old Testament. And I say that because we'll talk about righteousness when we get to the Beatitudes. It's so good, guys. I'm not going to deep dive here, but righteousness is connected to how you relate to people. And so Ruth is relating to her mother very well. She's not actually Israeli. She's coming into Israel with her mother who married someone outside, and then he died. So she went back to her homeland to get some coverage from somebody. And Ruth is like, I can't leave you alone, so I'm going to go with you. So Ruth comes with her. And then Ruth and Boaz, there's a whole book about it. Go read it. But Ruth is interacting with Boaz, and Boaz is interacting with Ruth, and they're doing everything according to the customs and the laws of Israel. And they're even going a little over and above. Like, Ruth is collecting the extra, because whenever Israel Israel was commanded when they would harvest their crops, cut the corners on purpose so that the poor people could go in and get stuff. And Ruth and her mother were poor, so Ruth was going in and collecting, and Boaz was like, hey, cut it a little wider so they get more. Like, his servant's like, okay, I mean, it's your land, but like, there's a little bit of generosity. There's so much going on here.
Yeah. Well, I just like that Boaz was like paying attention. He wasn't just, he had to be around to watch the needy and the poor collect.
Yes.
Which denotes there's a character that he has that's saying, hey, I want to make sure that these people are being fed. And he had such attentiveness and presence with those who were less fortunate than him that he spent time paying attention to where he's like, oh, they might need a little bit more, so they can have more of mine.
Yes.
Which that generosity is like the key to, that shows his open heart.
Yeah. Again, Ruth and Boaz are incredible Bible characters that like we should study more of. They're incredible.
Yeah.
So, but what Matthew is doing is you have 3 women, outsiders, who are now in the line of Jesus because they become righteous. All 3 of them are essentially called righteous in their stories. They're called what are we talking about here? Like, they become righteous. Like, it actually says later on in Hebrews that Rahab had faith. What? This is crazy. The Hebrews start to shout out Rahab as well. It's great. In the Hall of Faith, we have, what are we talking about? Like, Matthew is saying, hey, guys, there's something about Jesus' past I want you to know. The God of the universe, the God of gods, the actual Lord of lords, the one who created everything, Yahweh, chose to come into the world through this line on purpose. Not about pedigree. Though Jesus could be all about pedigree, it's not about pedigree. It's not about perfection, in other words. He chose this line. God chose to come in a line that's spotted with prostitutes and Gentiles, Canaanites, Moabites, but those people get redeemed and they're forever connected to the Messiah.
And I think that is like, we still think of this word perfect as this thing that's like, you know, never anything wrong. Whereas the Jewish mindset, to the best of my knowledge, at least the time in that day, like, perfection didn't mean this thing that was without blemish. It actually meant that it's the same on the inside as it is on the outside. There's no deception. There's no lies. There's like, this thing is authentic, essentially. And authenticity is such a rare thing. I know Nigel and I are really into like vibrations, and like, we think that love is the highest vibration. You can measure these actually, which is wild that we even can. But like, authenticity is like, I think it's like 20,000 times like higher of a vibration, where it's just like it is so important to be what we would say perfect, authentic, the same on the inside as the outside. And I think that's what's beautiful. We see in Tamar and Rahab and Ruth, they are constantly being who they are on the outside, even though it breaks cultural norms. And so God takes these people, and how they treat others is then how they are treated. And there's that divine law that God has put over the world, which is, you will be what you put into the world. Like, how you treat others is how you will be treated.
Yes, there's so much there.
So
yes, and what they do is they treat others well, and they start to submit to the ways of the Lord.
Yeah,
they do both. They treat others well, and they start to submit to the ways. They start to submit to the culture the Lord has created.
Right.
And so what he's saying, what Matthew seems to be saying in his genealogy, is that this gospel is about those who you think might not be in, can be in, if they treat others well. That's the kingdom. And if they start to submit to the lordship of the king. Those 2 things. Like, it's so fantastic when you see it. Essentially, Matthew is saying that those on the outside have a way into the kingdom. They always have. In fact, we've seen it in our history as Jewish people. Because of Jesus, they always will. And it's going to get simpler, if you will.
Right. Yeah. Agreed.
So why do you think this theme is Matthew's theme? Like, why do you think this theme resonated with Matthew?
Well, he was a tax collector.
Boom! Ding, 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 ding!
Basically, he was considered to be like the Jewish, he like betrayed his people.
Yes. Tax collectors back then were they essentially like gangsters. Like, they essentially were the people who would just take advantage of you. They would say, Rome would say, we want 32% tax. And they'd be like, all right, we're going to tax 45%. And we're going to take the other 13% for ourselves. And tax collectors, and maybe Matthew didn't, or they did. We don't know for sure. But that's essentially how most tax collectors worked. And then on top of that, they were the ones who were forcing if they were a Jewish tax collector, you're forcing your brothers to give you money to give to Rome, who is actually using that to keep you subjugated. Wait, what? Like, this guy is not, but he was on the outside. He was excommunicated, if you will, from the Jewish culture. And then one day Jesus walks by and calls him. And there he is, finding a way in through Jesus.
Yeah, while he was at the booth.
And he follows, and he submits, and he starts to relate to others differently, and he starts to submit to the kingdom of God, the King God rightfully put in place.
Yeah.
Jesus. It's an upside down kingdom, but really it's right side up. We're the ones that are upside down.
Yeah.
So,
well, there's that whole picture, we were talking about this, where if you think about the picture of I just go like a mountain, for example, and you have like this glassy valley of a water, right?
Yes.
So a lake. And if you are at this end of the shore looking at the mountain and you picture that as like the kingdom, earth being the reflection of that mountain, which is the upside down mountain in the glassy reflection of the water, that if we are being a reflection of heaven in this scene, the mountain is the kingdom of heaven, and we are kind of like that reflection of that kingdom, but it's upside down. So if we can be the upside down kingdom, we are being like the kingdom of heaven. So I just like that perspective, because it's like if we are being a reflection, then it'll appear that we are the upside down kingdom.
So good, Chase. So. Yes, it's a great way to imagine and how it is, right? It's a sign, it's a symbol. It's not exactly.
No.
Sorry, guys, you want a literal, but what it is it invokes worship that way. It invokes a way to think. That's a little bit how it is. It's not perfect. Just like every way we try to describe the Trinity is not, it doesn't hold weight to what the Trinity actually is. We just do our best.
Yeah. Well, like the moon is not the thing that gives off light itself. It appears that way. It is a great reflection and a more dim reflection, but of the sun, right?
Unless you believe the earth is flat. But that's a whole other story. So,
can of worms just got popped open.
Oh, that was a great word. I can't do. Ooh,
that was good too.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. We're trying here. So, well, let's get back into this. So good. No, but for real, the idea of the mountain and the reflection is so good, and hopefully that resonates with some people who are a little bit more visual than just words. And you want that visual. What does that mean?
Mine's very visual.
And so that gives you that great word picture that you're like, okay, I can see that.
I'm that kid who wants the pictures.
Yeah, I used to draw like osmosis and stuff in science, because I was like, I can't take notes just writing. I had to draw out what I was doing. I'm very much the same way, so that's why I can follow you with it. However, I don't teach that way. So let's keep moving. So we have the structure. Let's go talk about the structure of Matthew at the end here. So Matthew set up in structure. There's the intro is Matthew 1-4. So if you want to write this down, write it down. The intro is Matthew roughly 1-4. Then the body, which is broken up into about 5 parts. Typically, they call them the 5 major discourses. So there's 5 major discourses in Matthew, and that's going to be the body, and that's going to be essentially starting with the Sermon on the Mount and going all the way through Matthew 25, and then the outro roughly Matthew 26-28. Now, it's not exactly perfect. Again, when they wrote it, there were no chapters. So we have our own chapters, so there might be some slight overlap. It might be like 26:8 is actually where it starts, but you know what I'm saying. You get the ideas. These are the rough ideas. But there's 5 major discourses, and the first one is the Sermon on the Mount. And why did Matthew write 5 major discourses in the middle of his gospel to Jewish people? What does the 5 represent to Jewish people? The books of Torah, the books of Moses, Torah, right? Some say that Matthew's 5 discourses correlate with the books of Torah. The Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, right? Some say it's reversed. So we start with Deuteronomy and we go and we end with I've looked into it multiple ways. I don't know exactly. Maybe it's just all of it. It's so good that I don't know. It's both. It's a mirror, both and forward, because also it kind of is a mirror. Deuteronomy and Genesis have kind of mirrored anyway. So there's a lot there. The whole, if you know what a chiasm is, guys, some of you should by following us. But the books of Torah are actually a large chiasm. So that's a whole thing in itself. Yeah. So there is some mirroring happening with the books of Genesis and Deuteronomy. So it's really hard to figure out. If you love those kind of things, dive into the rabbit hole. It's fantastic. Yeah. But nonetheless, the first one, if it's Deuteronomy, it's a book of remembrance. It's reminding people. The Sermon on the Mount is reminding people of what the kingdom of heaven is and what God is doing on the earth. Or if it's Genesis, then it is a telling. This is the foundation of our faith. And I lean toward the Genesis one because it feels to me more of a foundational thing. And one of the first things he talks about is being a light of the world, and being God said, let there be light. So I think there's some credence to that. But either way, it's incredible because Matthew is showing us so much. And what the 5 discourses are, they're called the books of Moses. Matthew's gospel parallels Jesus and Moses so often.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Matthew's gospel is the only gospel that tells us that Herod the Great was trying to kill Jesus as a baby to parallel Pharaoh.
Oh, wow.
The other gospels don't mention that.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, Mark doesn't have baby Jesus, so we're good with that one. And John's like, Jesus is a metaphysical word. John doesn't really have like that, the stories either, right? And Luke opens up and it talks about the whole of Rome more than it talks about Israel. So like it's just different because you're talking about Augustus and Luke and things like that. It's different. So anyway, that being said, they both deliver the law on a mountain. They both deliver their words on a mountain. Jesus goes up, we call it the Sermon on the Mount for a reason. And Moses is on a mountain, Mount Sinai. They both are in the wilderness. Jesus for 40 days, the Israelites for 40 years. But Nigel, we're talking about the Sermon on the Mount. Why are we talking about all this other stuff? Why do we need to know all this stuff? Because the first century Jewish listener would know this.
Mm-hmm.
And you see the weight of what Jesus is doing. Because when you start to say Jesus is like Moses, you're like, Jesus is a deliverer. Like not just a king like David, but a deliverer like Moses. What's he delivering me from? Rome? What's he going to deliver us from?
That's what everybody thought.
That's what a lot of people thought. Jesus, seeing the crowds, goes up to the mountain on purpose. And we're going to read that later. But he sees the crowd. He goes up to the mountain to say, I am the new Moses, the new deliverer. I will lead the world out of chaos into peace. And what does Jerusalem mean? It's a city of peace. So he was teaching, and it truly confronted their paradigms. So when we get into the Sermon on the Mount, when you start reading it, understand the weight behind the world that Jesus was born into, and the weight behind what Jesus was doing. Any parting thoughts?
Mm-hmm. Not really.
All right, then pray us out.
Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. Ya'er Adonai pinav elecha v'yichunecha. Yisa Adonai pinav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Shalom, guys. Thank you.
Shalom.
Thanks for embarking on this podcast journey with us at Hyperlink. Your support means the world to us as a listener-supported podcast. If you've enjoyed our episodes and would like to contribute, please consider visiting patreon.com/hyperlinkpodcast. Stay connected with us by joining our community on Facebook at Hyperlink, a podcast journey. If you have any questions or would like to book us for an event, please feel free to email us at hyperlinknigel@gmail.com. Thank you once again for tuning in and being a part of the Hyperlink Collective. See you on the next episode.